that this has occurred in, especially in Canada, and I think this is occurring in the United States and as well as in the world, is that there is this been and has been a growing body of post-colonial, indigenous, feminist, qualitative research that's been changing what we call the landscape of research process. And it's certainly, you know, when I was in school in the 70s and early 80s, feminist work was very much about location and place and recognizing the sort of this post-structural theories or theories that had been used didn't include all the peoples, whether they were women or indigenous peoples or others. And so it was about a critique that was going on at that time. And that critique, it goes on, and that's part of the things that we do in our college and at the graduate studies level, is try to get students aware of that particular critique and its importance for our change and the transformation we make in our own peoples. There's also been a tremendous national and international interest in indigenous knowledge, and certainly the Rio Convention, the biodiversity conventions, the work that's been done with the ecology and the environment have largely drawn upon the importance of indigenous knowledge and the relationship of biodiversity to both languages and cultures in the world. And it's also important that we've had, certainly in the last 25 years or so, a growing number of indigenous scholars. Now, when I graduated in 1984 that I graduated in Canada with my PhD. And in that time, I was heralded as the first First Nations woman to have a PhD in Canada. And while there had been others who had PhDs, as in some Bill C-31 women who came on after 1985, you can see one person compared to now. I have been keeping track of how many Indigenous scholars there are in Canada. We have now over 550 Aboriginal PhDs in Canada, and then those are just those with PhDs. Then you have those who are now doctors, like MDs and so on, and there's another group of maybe, I would say, maybe another 100 to 200 of those. So we are a much growing group of people, and because of that growth, there's been an awful lot of research that has been going on, and among them are those people here. Now, in my work, I've been thinking about Indigenous knowledge for some time, and it wasn't until, I guess, somewhere in the early 70s and 80s, Indigenous knowledge was not a word that you ever heard. Basically, that kind of terminology didn't really come in until well about the 1990s, as we began to talk about that the word culture was used by, the ways in which anthropologists and linguists were looking at Indigenous people. They saw it as the other, as culture. And so pretty soon we started using those words, saying my language and my culture. And yet that wasn't exactly the terminology that really reflected, in ourselves who we were. And pretty soon, by asking people to go into their own languages, we found that within the Indigenous languages, they had other words that were not like this word culture. And I would say that not necessarily is it Indigenous knowledge yet either, and I think that we're still looking for the right word, but I think this captures at least some in the English discourses or languages a way of knowing. And the first thing is that no matter where you are as an Indigenous person, you're living in a place. You're living in a place, and because of your living in a place, which you may move, 1 century here, like the Salish who moved from this territory here have moved north, that kind of thing happens. But basically, your knowledge of this land remains. Just like as Narcissus and Ryan have talked about this morning, is that not only does the land it stay in your memory, the land has a memory as well. And the land has a memory that remembers who was there, remembers the language that was used there, remembers the prayers and the chants and the kinds of ceremonies that was done to renew that land over and over each year or each different times during the year. And so we are first and foremost people of some land. And when we go back to our people, we go back to a land. And the land then speaks to us, and it carries us. So there's food there, there's plants there, there's patterns of animals there, there's holy sites, and there's songs that can be gotten in those lands. It's when we go through a land and we hear a song. Well, that song is that song that was not just delivered to us, that song belonged in that land. And others, I've heard stories, and I don't know if it was Ryan or them were telling about how someone who heard a song then went into another place and sang that song, and they said, where did you hear that song? How do you know that song? And actually they got it from a particular place. And that's where the other people had learned that song as well. So we know that the land has memory. The land has cell memory. Our bodies have cell memories. We have cell memory, and our memories are of things that have happened to us in that place. So within that land, we also have languages, and how those languages work is that, you know, in terms of indigenous languages, there are, our indigenous languages are largely verb-based languages. And what these mean is that, like a chemistry table that has all of these little parts to it, indigenous languages has all of these prefixes and suffixes, so that when you are seeing something new happening, something happens. If you are listening, if an indigenous person saw that, they can name what they saw. Now, that's unlike us. You know, if we're speaking only in English language and we see a phenomenon happen, we can't name it. We just say, oh my God, I just saw something remarkable. I don't know what it was, but it was basically amazing. I saw some light, I saw, I don't know how to explain it. Because basically our English languages are only what has been given to us, and by deciding somewhere else that this is a noun, this is a verb, this is, a new word. I need some water. And so our languages can immediately give a new phenomenon a word. And as I was explaining to Sydney, is that's why it's so funny. When we're sitting, talking, listening to people, and they are seeing and talking and relating, it's so humorous, because you begin to hear things you've never heard before, things put together in new ways, and new descriptions of people, and the way they walk, or the way they talk, or the way, and so on. And that's what causes the kind of humor that's in our languages that makes it very much possible for us to be capturing on the spot with the dynamic language in which we live. And so the languages of the people who are living in this place are also constantly capturing what they know in that place. And then that knowing is then embedded in the stories and the oral traditions that are passed on. It also includes also in there how we remember and the observations we make, the experiments that were made, the new knowledge that is constantly coming about, and those are reflected in culture and science and technologies and sports and games, flora, fauna, seeds, medicines, art, and performing arts. It is also, indigenous knowledge is something that is owned by a collective. It is that, and in that it has been cultivated by those people. There's been ceremonies, and there has been an ongoing holding and passing on of that knowledge. Now, not all knowledge belongs to all the collective. That there is some knowledge that belongs to some families, maybe even some knowledge that belongs to some individuals. And it's up to them to pass on that knowledge to other individuals for the sake of the tribe. And so there'll be knowledge that belongs to, might be clans and families and societies. but in that it is still collectively owned in terms of how it is to be passed on, and there are particular